Boker Tov. Good morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos Daf Ayin Ches, Yevamos 78. And we're going to start on the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amabez of 77b. That the Gemara had recorded a dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the Tanakama as to whether or not an Egyptian, we know that there's a prohibition for Egyptian to marry into the community up until the third generation. So the Gemara discusses in today's Daf Yomi the dispute that Rabbi Shimon had said that the Egyptian woman can marry in right away because just like an Ammonite woman can marry in right away, whereas the Tanakama says no, the Egyptian women are like the Egyptian men that they have to wait until the third generation. So the Gemara cites a brayso that discusses this. Tan Rabbanan banim v'lo banos, divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, it says the boys in the verse, it says banim asher yivaldu lahem dor shlishi yavo mikal Hashem. The boys that will be born for them in the third generation can come into the community of God. Hakosov, so which means, says Rabbi Shimon, banim and not banos. This only applies to the boys have to wait to the third generation, but the girls can come in right away. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Harei Omer, banim asher yivaldu lahem dor shlishi. It says the verse says banim asher yivaldu, which will be born in the third generation. Hakos of tolan b'leida. The verse says it's dependent upon giving birth, which means it also applies to, and then the kavos as well, to the females as well. And so that's why we say that the females also have to wait until the third generation because the verse is dependent upon giving birth. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, you have the Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hakos of tolan b'leida. So it says that Rabbi Yochanan, or not for the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says the verse says it depends upon giving birth. Well, if it weren't the case, we would have nothing to stand on. We wouldn't have a leg or a hand or a leg to stand on in the base medrash because why? Because Rabbi Yehuda is at the position that the converts are considered part of the community, and therefore, if that's the case, that if a female Egyptian is considered part of a community and she's a full Jew, then how is a male Egyptian ever going to come to a third generation? Because he's only able to marry. If we say he's marrying a female Egyptian, but she's a Jew, then who is the male Egyptian going to end up marrying? And how is he ever going to have to a situation with third generation Egyptian? And so therefore, we wouldn't have a leg or a hand to stand on the base medrash. So the Gemara said, because B'mitzri Sheni on the top of 78a, because it states, but Mitzri Sheni and Mayitayr. Otherwise, how would the second generation Egyptian, who is he supposed to marry? He can't marry the Egyptian woman because she's a Jew. So therefore, how would we ever have a case of a third generation Egyptian? So on top of 78a, the Gemara says, what do you mean we'd have a case? I'll tell you how we'd have a case. Dilma Dei Avar V'Nasev. We're talking about a situation where if the second generation Egyptian went ahead and married a Jew or a third gen or a second generation or a Egyptian convert, then under those circumstances, the offspring is considered a third generation and he can marry into the people. If he did it in sin, the Gemara says no. The evil kasev kra. The verse is not going to tell us you could only marry in a situation where you commit a sin. That's not what we were referring to. The Torah never talks about those possibilities where you commit a sin and that's how you get something. Versus, what are you talking about? How are mamzer? What about the case of a mamzer, which is this bastard, which is he himself only became a mamzer through the result of the sin of his parents, and so nevertheless, the Torah says a mamzer is not allowed to marry somebody. So we see that the case of a de'i where something is prohibited, the Torah still records it. Gemara says the isura kasav. In a situation where if you do something and now something becomes prohibited, well, that the Torah will write. But the where if you do something and now, as a result, because you did this prohibited thing, something else becomes permitted, that the Torah won't write. The Gemara says, but yeah, there's an example of something like that. Where if you marry a woman and then divorce her, she marries somebody else, and then she gets divorced from that person, you're not allowed to marry her again. But if you do marry her again, the offspring is not a mamzer, and the Torah tells us about that the offspring can marry into the Jewish people. So the iwa tera, that's something that if you violate the sin, and something will be permitted because the Torah tells us about it. The Gemara says, no, there in that case, the reason why the Torah tells us about it is it's different. Also, Mishum Ikor Isuru the there the Torah wants to tell us about the main prohibition of what's called Maser Rishasa. Says the Gemara, the Brisa states, Im Nomer Banim, Mama Nemer Doros. Why does it say Banim Asher Yivaldu Ahem Ador Shlishi Yavo Ahem B'Kal Hashem? Banim Asher Yivaldu Ahem Dor Shlishi Yavo Ahem B'Kal Hashem. It could have just stated, says Rashi, could have just stated Ben Shlishi Yavo, the third generation will come, the third son will come, or Dor Shlishi Yavo, or the third generation will come. Why does it have to say Banim Asher Yivaldu Ahem Dor Shlishi? So the Gemara says, Banim Wama Nemer, Im Nomer Banim Wama Nemer Doros. If it says sons, why does it have to say generations? Im Nomer Doros, Wama Nemer Banim. Why does it say generations? Why does it have to say sons? Gemara explains, Im Nomer Banim, if it had said sons, V'lo Nemer Doros, and it didn't say Doros, Ha'isi Omer, I might have thought, Ben Rishon Mesheni Asur Shlishi Mutter. I might have thought, look, the first son and the second son of the Egyptian is prohibited, but the third one is permitted. Therefore it says generations. Im Nemar Doros, and if it said generations, Nemar Banim, and it didn't say sons, Hayiti Omer, I might have said, I might have said that this refers only to those who are standing on Mount Sinai. That generation and the next generation is prohibited, but the third generation after Sinai will be permitted. Therefore it states the sons, meaning to say it's in all future generations. That the first generation who converts, you have to wait till the third generation to marry him. So the Gemara says, what about the verse? It says, Banam Asher Yivaldu Lahem. What do we learn out from the word Lahem? Mehem Mana. It means that the first one who converts, he counts as first generation, and his son is second generation, and his grandson will be permitted. So, and also we learn out from Lahem Halach Achar Psuin. And then the verse also states, it states twice, Banam Asher Yivaldu Lahem. It says the word Lahem in that pasuk twice to tell us. The first one is to say we count from that Egyptian, that he's the first generation, and the second one is to tell us halach achar psuin. Then in the case, so that we follow after the psuin, we follow after their I guess their deficiency. And we need both of them. We need both lahems to be written. We need both lahems to be written. Why do we need both lahems to be written? Hold on one second. Why do we need both lahems to be written? And we also need to be written asher yivaldu, that will be born. So why do we need that? Even though we're saying that we follow after the disqualified one, we also needed to say Asher Yivaldu. Because of Rahman Asher Yivaldu, if it just wrote Asher Yivaldu, Hava Amina, I might have said Mi B'neihem Mana, that we go from their offspring, that their offspring is the first generation considered of Egyptians. So because of Rahman Lahem, the Torah says Lahem, we count from them the first generation. Because of Rahman Lahem, and if the Torah just said Lahem, Hava Amrina, I might have said Mitri Muberes Sheniskaira Hiu B'nai Chad. And if an Egyptian woman converts with her pregnant, and while she's pregnant, that she and her offspring both count as the first generation. So because of Rahmana Asher Yivaldu. So therefore the Torah says one who gives birth, to teach us that the one that's born after she converted counts as second generation. And it needs to write Lahem. Needs to write the word Lahem here and also by Mamzer, where it states Lo Yavo Mamzer B'Kal Hashem Gamdor Asiri Lo Yavo Lo, that he will not be able to come in. Because of Rahman Lahem, to tell us that over here we follow the disqualified one. In case where let's say there's a male Egyptian and a female Jew, we follow the disqualified one. Why? Because Mishum Debami Tipa Psua. I might have said, well, over here we follow the disqualified one because the father is an Egyptian, and so therefore we follow the disqualified one. But by the mamzer, where his father is Jewish, I might have said we don't go after the disqualified one. V'i Kasav Rahman Agabi Mamzer, and if we only wrote it by the Mamzer, or say Mishum Dein Rav Kal Olam, because he's never allowed to come into the community. So therefore, but here, since it's eventually permitted, I might not have thought we go after the Psulan. So therefore, you need a tzricha in both places. Amar Rav Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to now see two different teachings in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, two opposite teachings. So the first one is Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mitzri Sheni, a second generation Egyptian, Shenasa Mitzris Rishona, who marries a first generation woman who's an Egyptian, B'nah Shlishi. We follow, according to this approach, we follow the male, and therefore he's considered a third generation Egyptian, and he can marry him. Alma Kasavar Basar Didesha, we see we follow the man. But Mazar Rav Yosef challenges this teaching that was recorded in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Tarfon says, Yecholam Mamzer, and Rabbi Tarfon said, a Chiddush, let's say a Mamzer, we know a Mamzer is never allowed to marry in, but Rabbi Tarfon said, I'll tell you a Chiddush how the Mamzer can marry in. Ketzad, Mamzer Nasa Shifla, let's say the Mamzer becomes a Hebrew slave, and he marries a female Canaanite, Avad Eved. Then the offspring is going to be considered a slave, a Canaanite slave. Shechroro, let's say you free this Canaanite slave, Nimtza ben Chorim, then the Canaanite slave becomes free. Alma Basar Didesha, we see from here that we follow the father, meaning Basar Didasha, we follow the mother, because we say the offspring is a Canaanite slave, and we don't follow the father. So Rabbi Yochanan said we follow the father, but here we see we follow the mother, and we see that the offspring is a Canaanite slave because the mother is a Canaanite slave. But by the way, this is Pasam. We could say that this is how Mamzer could theoretically marry in. If the Mamzer declares himself a Canaanite Eved Ivri, or he's sold by the court as an Eved Ivri, marries a Canaanite slave, and then that offspring can then be freed and then marry a Jew. But the poskim say that this is not something that practically speaking should be done, because we don't want to make slaves today. Even as a legal fiction, it's considered to be offensive and obscene, obviously, so we don't do it. But maybe if a mamzer is in a desperate situation, maybe that's something they could discuss with the posik. So the Gemara says, no, the case of the Canaanite slave is different. Why? Shani also in that case is different. There it says specifically that the offspring follows the mother, because there's a verse. So most of Rava challenges this idea that we follow the father, because according to Rabbi Yochanan we follow the father. Rabbi Yehuda Minyamin Ger Mitzri Chaver Mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva. He says, Rabbi Yehuda said, when I was studying in the base measures of Rabbi Akiva, I had a chaver, I had a charusa, and his name was Minyamin. He was a convert from an Egyptian. And he said, Ani Mitzri Rishon. He says, I'm first generation Egyptian. Menasati Mitzri Rishon. I married a first generation Egyptian woman. Asi with me Mitzri Shniya. I'm gonna take my son, and he's gonna marry a second generation Egyptian woman, so that his son can marry into the Jewish community. And if we say we follow the man, then why does he have to marry a second generation Egyptian woman? He could also marry a first generation Egyptian. Versus Rabbi Yochanan. Tana Rishona. Yeah, that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Let's change that price and say that he could even marry a first generation Egyptian, and it'll be okay because we follow the father, and the father was a second generation Egyptian. When Rav Dimi came, he brought a teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, which was the opposite of what Rabbi Bar Chana brought in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He'd say Mitzri Sheni, Shenatza Mitzri Rishona, B'nah Sheni Have. He says no. He says if a second generation male marries a female Egyptian, the offspring is a second generation. Alma Basari May, we follow the mother. Abai says, well, if that's the case, why are we following the mother? What's the concept? As Tosfos explains, the concept is the Uber Lav Yerach. The concept is, why are we following the mother? Because we're saying Uber is Yerach Imohu. And so we're going to say that the fetus is part of the mother. That's a concept that we have in Chulin. And so we see from here, therefore we follow the mother. That's what Rav Dimi is saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. What about the fact that Rabbi Yochanan taught elsewhere? Let's say you designate a sin offering that was pregnant, the Yalda, and the offering gave birth. If you want, you could use either one to use as an atonement. Now, if you want to say the offspring is not part of the mother, that makes sense. That makes sense because it's like you designated two sin offerings. And Rav Oshaya taught that if you designate two sin offerings, then you could use either one as an atonement. And the second one will just graze. But if you say the fetus is really part of the mother, then if you want to say like Rabbi Yochanan, you see to me saying that the fetus was part of the mother and therefore we follow the mother. Well, in this case, the fetus should be the offspring of the chatas, and therefore vlad chatas umisasal. You can't sacrifice the offspring of a sin offering. Now it goes to death. It's one of chatos amesos. So when Abaye said this to Rav Dimi, Ishtik, he was quiet. So Amrullah, then Abaye said, maybe Dilmi Shana Hasam, maybe by the case of the Mitzri, it's different. What's the reason why by the Mitzri we follow the mother? Specifically, that case is different because it says Asher Yivaldu. It says the ones who give birth. Hakasav Tala Baleda by the Egyptian, specifically the Torah says it depends upon the birth. And so when Rav Dimi heard this, Amrullah Karkafna, she says, Adam Chashav, a distinguished person. I saw your head amongst the pillars. When Rabbi Yochanan indeed taught this teaching that we follow the mother, by the Mitzri, meaning to say if it was a male Egyptian and a female Egyptian, we follow the mother's level. He said the reason was the Ksiva Shar Yivaldu. In general, we follow the father. And we say the uber lav yerach imuhu, that the fetus is not part of the mother. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that you want to say the fetus is not part of the mother, that a woman who was converting and she immersed in the mikvah while she was pregnant, the offspring does not require immersion. If we say the fetus is not part of the mother, the offspring. The fetus should require immersion when it comes out. You can't say it was immersed with the mother. It's its own entity. And if you want to say, well, maybe it actually did immerse because when the mother went in, it was independent, but it immersed. And if you want to say Mishum the Rabbi Yitzchak, Bar Torah, Rubo Makbedel of Chotzis, Rubo Shein Makbedel of Eino Chotzis, that since the fetus, basically, even though there was a belly over it, we're going to say it doesn't mind that being there, and so it immersed in the mikvah. That can't be the case. Why? Top of 78b, that's only if there's just a majority, if it has an interposition of okulo, but if the whole thing was covered up, we would say chotzetz, it's an interposition. So how can it immerse in the mikvah? It's inside something else. Whereas in the Shani Uber, in the case of a fetus, is different than Hainu Rabisa. That's the natural way in which it grows, so that's immersion in the mikvah is considered valid. Kiyasa Ravina, Rabbi Yochanan, so Ravina came in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He said, "Be'umos halach achar hazachar." He said, when it comes to males, we follow. When it comes to the nations of the world, we follow the males. This gyro, when it comes to converting, halach achar pagam shebeshneim. When they converted, we follow the defect in both of them. What does this mean? Be'umos halach achar hazachar. When it comes to the nations of the world, we follow the males. Kenetanya minayin le'echad min ha'umos. So let's say there was one of the nations of the world who was with a female Canaanite, the Holad Ben, and they gave birth to a son. How do we know Shatar Shailik knows about it? How do we know it's not a Canaanite and therefore you can acquire him as a slave? Because it says, V'gami Mnei Toshavim Agaram Imachem Mehem Tiknu. Meaning amongst those who live amongst you, you can acquire. I might think, let's say, even it was a male Canaanite who was with a female of the nations of the world. So That you could purchase him as a slave. No, that's a Canaanite. And a Canaanite, you're not allowed to purchase as a slave, since the father was a Canaanite. As it says, Asher Holidu Ba'artzam. You're only allowed to purchase as a slave those who are born, i.e., they're born from a non-Canaanite father, but a Canaanite mother, but not from the ones who live in your land who are from a Canaanite father and a non-Canaanite mother, because we follow the father when it comes to the nations of the world. But we said, but if they convert it, we follow the defects amongst both of them. So what does this statement of Rav Yochanan mean? So the Gemara says, what's he referring to? If you want to say it's a male Egyptian who marries an Ammonis, well, what's the defects amongst both of them? What's the defects amongst both of them? Ammoni vo Ammonis. We know that the female Ammonis is allowed to marry in. So it must be Ba'amoni Shenasa Mitzris. It must be a male Ammonite who marries an Egyptian woman. If it's a male, then say he's like the Ammonite. And Inekeva Habe Shadia Basar Mitzris. And if it's a female, then we say under these circumstances, we follow the pogrom of both of them. If it would be a male, we say he follows the Ammonite, and that's the more defective one. If it would be a female, we're going to say Shadya Basar Mitzris. We say that it's we follow the Egyptian woman, and so therefore she's going to be the offspring is going to be considered a second generation Egyptian, and therefore she can't marry an Israelite. Only her son can marry an Israelite, or her daughter. And we don't say she's an Ammonis right away. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. Mamzer v'nesinin asurin isur olam. That the male mamzer and the nesinin were the nations of the world. We'll see more about them. Like one of the nations that was prohibited by Moses and David and Joshua. Moses, Joshua, and David. Their prohibition is forever. Whether they're male or female. Comes along Rish Lakish, she seems to argue with our Mishnah. The Amar Rish Lakish, mamzeres, a female mamzer, achar asera doros mutaros. Rish Lakish says a female mamzer after 10 generations is permitted to marry him. Yof asiri asiri me ammoni ume'avi. You learn out the 10 generation. You learn asiri by comparing a mamzer to an Ammonite and a Moabite. A Mawal, it says the word asiri by the Ammonites and also by the mamzer. Just like by the Ammonites and the Moabites, then the kavos are mutaros, the females are permitted. Afkan the kavos mutaros. All too by a mamzer, we're going to say that the females are also going to be permitted. Well, the Gemara says, well, if you're comparing the mamzer to the Ammonites, miyad by the Ammonites and Moabites, the females are permitted immediately. Afkan miyad, here too it should be permitted. By the mamzer, why don't we allow the females to be permitted immediately? Mar says, Kihanik Zereshava. The comparison to the Ammonites and the Moabites and the mamzer only helps from 10 generations onward. So the Gemara said, meaning to say from the 10th generation onward. The Gemara says, but how could the female mamzer be permitted? Our Mishnah says that the females are prohibited by the mamzer. Versus Lokasha, Hakamandamar Domina. Well, it's a dispute when we do Gzeira Shava. Do we compare the whole context or just a portion of the context to each other? So the one who says that we domino, we compare the whole thing, that it's the female mamzer after 10 generations is permitted, but we're going to say so that we compare, but we say that we drop it when we say that that they're prohibited forever. Whereas the one who says Uki Ba'asra says no, we could say Uki Ba'asra and could leave that part that they're prohibited forever in its place, but we could compare the part about the females and say they'll be permitted after 10 generations. Show us Rabbi Eliezer, so they want to know from Rabbi Eliezer, what's the law about a female mamzer after 10 generations? Amar Lahem, he said to them, give me a third generation mamzer about to run. I'll purify him. He didn't say there's no such thing, Rashi explains. He was saying there's no such thing. You can't live for a third generation and be alive. A mamzer can't live for 3 generations. Alma Kasavar mamzer lo chaya. He's at the position that a mamzer will not be able to live. Hashem will not allow the mamzer to live because we're concerned that the Jewish people become suffused with mamzerim. Rav Kahana says the mamzer won't live. The Gemara says, but what about our mission? It says they're prohibited forever. So he says this was explained to me. That what it means is, so he says, that what does this mean? So it means, Rabbi Yehuda explained to me, if you know for sure he's a mamzer, chaya, then the mamzer can live, because then we're not concerned somebody's going to marry in. If you don't know for sure if the mamzer is going to live, well, then he can't marry in. Because then people won't know he's a mamzer, and he's going to make more mamzerim, and the Jewish people won't be pure. But the idea of but if some people know and others don't know, that'll live up until 3 generations. People will still be talking about it for 3 generations, but more than that, Lochai is not going to live, because then then people forget that he was originally maybe a mamzer. That he was a mamzer. There was a person who lived in the neighborhood of Rabbi Ami. What happened? Rabbi Ami said, "You're a mamzer." The guy was starting to cry. He was crying and crying. He says, he's called me a mamzer. Rabbi Ami says, you should thank me. I give you your life, because if people wouldn't know you're a mamzer, you'd be struck down from heaven. So by declaring you a mamzer publicly, I saved your life. David decreed against these Nesinim that you're not allowed to marry in. We're not going to see the full story about that today, but we'll start the story. David decreed about the Nesinim that you're not allowed to marry into them. As it states, in the verse in 2nd book of Shmuel, David called to the Givonim and he said to them, the Givonim are not from the children of Israel. My time ago, why did David make a decree against the Givonim? Because it says, there was a famine for 3 years in Israel. Rishona, the first year, David said, David looks at the Jewish people and says, maybe you are idolaters. As it states, it says, if you worship idolatry, you won't have any rain. No, but there were no idolaters. Second year, it says, maybe you're committing sexual sins. It says, because it says that that if you're going to be sinning with adultery, then what's going to happen is that the rain is going to stop. So maybe that's what's going on here. They weren't sinning in that manner. Shlishi, the 3rd year, maybe there are people amongst you who are sinning by not giving charity, but they're claiming that they're going to give charity and not going to give. So no, they didn't have that sin either. So he says the sin is basically, it depends upon me. He says it's all up to me. What is it? So David requested from God to know what's going on. What does that mean? David went to the Urim Tumim, which is on the Kohen Gadol of the breastplate, and he asked, "My mashma, how do we know that he asked the Urim Tumim?" Amar Belezer Asya Pnei Pnei. We work with the word Pnei. It says David sought the face of God. And it says they asked him in the Urim V'Tumim. So with Hashem. And by Yomer Hashem al Shaul. So what did God say? God said al Shaul val Beis Adamim. it's because of Saul and the Beis Adamim because they killed the Givonim, his house of blood. El Shaul, what does it mean to Shaul? Shaul Nispa Kalacha. Saul was not eulogized properly. That was David's fault. On Beis Adamim, Asher Misa Givonim, and what does that mean? The house of blood, because Saul killed the Givonim. Where did Saul kill the Givonim? Because Saul had killed the city of Nov, all the Kohanim there. Therefore, because they were providing food and water for the Givonim. So it was assumed it was as though Saul had killed these the Givonim themselves, even though he didn't actually kill them. He killed the city of the Kohanim. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. You're making the claim that Saul was killed, that the famine came because Saul was not eulogized properly. And yet you're also saying that the famine came because Saul did this terrible sin. So which is it? Is it Saul was not eulogized properly, or was it because Saul did this terrible sin of killing the Givonim? Gemara says, yeah, it's both. What does it mean when you say Bikshuas Hashem? Bakshuas Hashem Kohen Vai Eretz Asher Mishpato Pa'alu, meaning to say Ba'asher Mishpato Sham Pa'alu, that in the place where they judge a person, there you also have to mention his righteousness, and so therefore they should have eulogized Saul properly. Okay, I'll be happy to take any questions from this beautiful daf.